The glove sat alone on a cold iron bench in Volkspark, Friedrichshain, East Berlin, a dark smudge of leather against the frostbitten slats, stiff with ice and time. Pedestrians passed without notice, bundled in gray coats and preoccupied with ration cards, queues, or the silent arithmetic of survival in a city that watched itself. The glove, a man's right-handed, high-quality calfskin, lined with burgundy satin, rested unnaturally pristine amid the grit and slush of late February 1983. It hadn't been there an hour ago. Major Lutz Eberhardt of the Ministry for State Security, or Stasi, turned the corner on his routine patrol, boots crunching faintly over the pavement, collar raised against the biting wind that screamed like secrets between tenements. He paused, not for the cold, but because he noticed the glove. Eberhardt wasn't a man who noticed gloves. He noticed patterns. That was his gift and his curse. The bench was part of his daily route, one of 74 such fixed observation points mapped in his head from 5 years of methodical patrols, each burned into his mind like surveillance film. This glove was new, out of place, surgically placed, almost staged. He didn't move to pick it up. Instead, he stood 5 paces away and lit a cigarette, as if simply taking a break. Smoke coiled from his lips while his eyes scanned for watchers watching watchers. A mother dragging a child, a pensioner feeding pigeons, a young man tying his shoe too long by the fountain. All background noise, except the glove screamed foreground. After several minutes, Eberhardt walked on, not because he was dismissing the object, but because it needed to stay where it was. A removed object triggered nothing, but a watched object. Ah, that was bait. That night, in his report to Section 9, Counterintelligence and Surveillance, he described it clinically. Unidentified leather article of Western manufacture, possible brush contact or dead drop marker. Recommend passive surveillance deployment. He included a sketch. The next morning, 2 cameras were embedded in nearby lampposts. A plainclothes operative posed as a pensioner on the adjacent bench with a thermos of broth and a camera disguised as binoculars. Another agent lingered as a jogger. The glove remained untouched. But on the third day, at precisely 14:42, a man in a wool coat with embassy plates walked by, paused subtly, and continued on, nothing unusual. Except that after his pause, the glove was gone, and what came next would send shockwaves through East German intelligence, leading to a manhunt, a betrayal inside the American diplomatic corps, and the dismantling of one of the CIA's most covert operations in the Eastern Bloc. All because Major Eberhardt had noticed a glove on a bench and, critically, had not picked it up. East Berlin in 1983 was less a city and more a breathing, blinking organism of surveillance, suspicion, and psychological warfare, a place where even silence had a sound. The wall carved through its body like a surgical scar, gray concrete stretching high and brutal, topped with barbed wire, and watched by towers manned with rifles and reinforced ideology. To the west, blinking neon, freedom, and possibility. To the east, a monochrome maze where every step might echo into a dossier. It wasn't simply the wall that divided. It was the fear, the bureaucracy, the sense that even your thoughts might be overheard. Inside apartment buildings, behind peeling wallpaper and faulty light switches, microphones embedded by the Stasi listened to private arguments, whispered dreams, and damning complaints muttered in kitchens after too much schnapps. In stairwells and basements, neighbors passed each other with nods that concealed volumes, unsure whether to speak or stay mute, each word another roll of the dice. Children were taught in school that their parents might not understand socialism as well as they did, and were encouraged subtly, sometimes directly, to report troubling conversations at home. Telephones clicked faintly when connected, an auditory reminder that someone was always on the line, an unseen bureaucrat with headphones, pausing the recording only for the occasional sip of lukewarm tea. The streets weren't empty, but they felt drained of spontaneity. People walked quickly, efficiently, without the expressive chaos of their counterparts across the wall. Bars and cafes had patrons, but laughter was cautious, and voices dropped when political topics edged too close. Bureaucracy reigned supreme. Identification papers were inspected without reason, travel permits denied without explanation, job placements dictated not by merit but by perceived ideological reliability. Even art and music were scrubbed clean of subversion, guitars tuned, theater scripts censored, brushstrokes monitored for counter-revolutionary symbolism. The Ministry for State Security, or Stasi, had turned the city into a hall of mirrors, and their reach was nearly total. With over 90,000 official employees and nearly 200,000 informants embedded among a population of just under 17 million, East Germany had created what historians would later call the most intrusive surveillance state in human history. In this environment, paranoia wasn't a disorder, it was a survival mechanism. And amid this suffocating atmosphere of control, where trust was a currency few could afford, the discovery of a misplaced glove on a park bench wasn't just curious, it was electric. Because nothing in East Berlin was left behind without a reason. Every object had a history, every movement a motive, and every breach in routine, no matter how small, rippled outward in the minds of men like Major Eberhardt. In a city where the watchers were watched, and loyalty was a shifting shadow, a simple glove would become a thread, and once pulled, it would unravel not just a spy's careful web, but the illusion that anything, object, person, or memory, could remain hidden in the heart of East Germany. The glove should not have been there. Major Lutz Eberhardt was certain of it, not from arrogance, but from repetition. From the muscle memory of observation honed over 1,000 slow patrols through East Berlin's skeletal parks. Volkspark Friedrichshain was part of his Thursday circuit, and Eberhardt, a man who distrusted coincidence as much as he despised defectors, knew every corner bench and lamppost by instinct. At 1317, there had been nothing on that bench but a dusting of snow and a cigarette butt half buried in slush. Yet, when he passed it again at 1323, there it was, a men's right-hand glove, sleek and angular, the leather too fine, too clean, too foreign. He stopped, casually, he hoped, and surveyed the scene. No one nearby seemed to have lost anything. No one lingered with the nervous body language of a person who had accidentally left something behind. But the glove sat like a challenge, like an inserted detail in a photograph that had been perfectly symmetrical before. Eberhardt, hands behind his back, shifted slightly to get a better view without appearing to stare. He had seen gloves before, as of course. Berlin was cold, after all. But this glove had stitching that suggested American manufacture, and inside, as he later noted in his report, he glimpsed a strange lining, deep burgundy with faint silver threading, possibly silk. It was not East German issue, not the practical wool blend sold in people's stores, not even black market Soviet standard. It didn't belong. But more damning than its design was its timing, a 6-minute interval, and an object appears with surgical precision. This wasn't carelessness. This was a signal, a message, a marker. Eberhardt didn't touch it. Instead, he adjusted his gloves, noted the time on his Breitling, a reward from a long-ago operation in Budapest, and walked on, deliberately slower now, allowing himself a half-minute to glance into doorways, windows, and passing cars. He saw nothing unusual, yet the glove remained in his mind like a riddle. Back at headquarters that evening, he drafted a field report for subsection 2-9, Foreign Influence and Covert Communications. He logged the glove's description, its coordinates, the weather, the foot traffic. He didn't speculate. Stasi reports were not for poetry, but in his private journal, locked inside a hidden drawer beneath a false bottom, he wrote one sentence in stark black ink. A glove placed without context is not a glove. It is a question with no words. He didn't know then that this question would become the key to unmasking the most elusive American asset operating on East German soil. Nor did he know how much blood, silence, and betrayal would follow. All he knew, as he prepared for surveillance deployment the next morning, was that the pattern had broken. And in East Berlin, where control was the pattern, nothing was more dangerous than something that didn't fit. The next morning, a dull frost crusted the sidewalks as Major Eberhardt stood beneath a leafless birch, gloved hands behind his back, appearing as if on a routine pause. But in truth, he was waiting for confirmation that Protocol Red Leaf had been quietly activated. The glove had not moved overnight, which only deepened his certainty. It had not been forgotten. It had been placed. So he had done what men like him were trained to do. He reported not the object, but the anomaly. Within 12 hours, 2 micro-cameras were installed by Section 2-9's field operatives, disguised as broken light fixtures, angled discreetly at the bench. A plainclothes surveillance team took over an adjacent maintenance shed, converted it into a temporary ops station, and by 14 Agua that same day, Operation Nest Glands was live. The plan was simple: watch, record, report. For 3 consecutive days, agents rotated 12-hour shifts, watching as the park flowed with life. Old men feeding birds, school children passing noisily after class, lovers exchanging state-approved affection, and workers on their lunch breaks. The glove remained untouched, until 1439 on the second day, when a figure entered the camera's wide-angle lens, male, mid-40s, light brown overcoat, standard-issue trousers, and dark gloves of his own. He walked briskly, then slowed near the bench. His eyes scanned the horizon, never lowering to the object. But at 1441, he paused beside it, not long enough to arouse suspicion to the casual observer, but long enough for Eberhardt to mark it. 11 seconds, not 10, not 12, 11. Just long enough to establish a beat. He resumed walking, no contact, no retrieval, no interaction, but the pause was too precise, too deliberate. On the third day, the man returned. Same coat, same gait, same time. Again he paused, again for 11 seconds. This time, he turned his head slightly toward the glove, and his left hand touched the pocket of his coat, not in a fidgeting gesture, but with the smooth confidence of muscle memory. An unconscious signal, a calibration. Eberhardt reviewed the footage that night, frame by frame, and logged it under likely asset interaction, non-contact phase. The pattern was forming, but it wasn't yet complete. The man never sat, never lingered, never reached. He simply existed in orbit around the glove, using it, perhaps, as a marker, either for his own handler or as part of a dead drop chain. And yet the glove remained unclaimed. It was both the message and the message board, and Eberhardt knew that meant more layers were at play. Surveillance was extended indefinitely, with orders to monitor for the next escalation. Contact. Because soon, someone would come not to pause, but to take. And that someone, Eberhardt suspected, would either be the courier or the spy. Either way, the glove was no longer just leather and silk. It was the bait in a game whose rules only one side understood, for now. He was a ghost with a passport. The man who paused by the glove had no name, no expression, and no irregularities, until the Stasi found his car. Surveillance footage from a tram-mounted lens 3 blocks west of Volkspark Friedrichshain had captured his departure. Same coat, same pace. But this time, he slipped into a dark Volvo with diplomatic plates, white letters on black, easily missed unless you were trained to notice. Major Eberhardt was trained. A quick pull from the interministry registry confirmed the car was registered to the U.S. Embassy under the name James Harwood, Cultural Attaché. It was a title so vague it might as well have read Professional Liar. Eberhardt had seen it before. Cultural officers who attended no events, reported on no exhibitions, yet traveled frequently to Leipzig, Dresden, and occasionally Warsaw. The embassy, of course, would deny everything. That was expected. But inside the walls of the gray Stasi complex on Normannenstrasse, Harwood's name was underlined twice in red ink and added to watch list Echo 3. What followed was procedure with surgical intensity. A 3-man shadow team began tailing Harwood each day from his embassy apartment in Mitte to the state library, to restaurants, to diplomatic receptions, always maintaining the legal limits demanded by international law, always towing the line without stepping over. But covertly, things escalated. Harwood's trash was retrieved and examined. Banana peels, used floss, shredded notes that were reassembled under halogen lamps in a quiet lab. Most were mundane. One, however, contained part of a train schedule with time circled in pencil. Nothing overt, but suspicious enough to keep the taps running. His telephone, landline, and embassy issued, was routed through interception filters, recording everything, cataloging even the silences between words. Harwood rarely used phones for anything substantive, which only confirmed Eberhardt's suspicion. He knew he was being watched. That, more than anything, marked him as professional. He never deviated from his routine. 0720 coffee from the same vendor, 0810 entry to the embassy garage, 1735 exit. But on the 4th day after the glove surveillance began, he broke pattern. At 1912, under heavy snow, he left his apartment alone, on foot, with no overcoat, carrying nothing. The shadow team followed, puzzled. Harwood walked 3 blocks to a kiosk, bought a pack of cigarettes he didn't smoke, and returned. It was a ghost move, a feint. But it told Eberhardt everything. Harwood knew they were there. He was showing them that he didn't care, or more dangerously, that he had already won something they hadn't noticed. Back at headquarters, analysts began a full profile build, CIA placement timelines, matching known Western operatives, looking for travel patterns and analogs in Vienna or Bucharest. That's when they found the name again, Harwood, registered at a NATO conference 2 years earlier in Ypres. Brussels under a different alias, James Weston. 2 names, 1 face. The web was tightening. Eberhardt stared at the files for hours, the glove now locked in evidence, untouched. Harwood hadn't retrieved it, but someone would, and Eberhardt intended to be watching when they did. On the 5th day, the glove disappeared. It didn't vanish with drama, nor was it picked up in a rush. It was a sleight of hand. A magician's swap performed in broad daylight on the stage of a frozen city. At 14:40, James Harwood walked his usual path past the park bench, body posture casual, scarf loosened as if he were simply letting the East Berlin cold touch his American skin. But the cameras, 4 of them, hidden in lampposts, drain grates, and one cleverly disguised in the eye of a weatherproof park statue, captured it frame by frame, a flick of the wrist, a coat sleeve brushing the bench, and then, impossibly, the glove was different. Not visibly, not to an ordinary passerby, but the seams shifted slightly, the position reversed. The original glove, left days ago as a marker, had been palmed and replaced with an identical twin. The Stasi watching from their nearby van didn't move yet. Harwood continued down the path, never glancing back. The new glove sat alone once again. For 4 hours it remained untouched, and Eberhardt waited, the way a spider waits for tension in its web. Then she arrived, a woman in her late 30s, modest coat, gray skirt, hair in a tight bun, carrying a folded newspaper in one gloved hand and a handbag with a frayed strap. She moved with the kind of practiced invisibility cultivated by 1,000 citizens trying to remain unnoticed in a country where being seen could be fatal. She approached the bench, sat briefly, no more than 10 seconds, and rose again, the glove now gone, palmed with precision and hidden beneath the folded newspaper. The retrieval was clean, tight, professional. Eberhardt gave the signal. 2 surveillance officers tailed her from a distance, and 3 blocks away, outside a bakery, they apprehended her quietly, without spectacle. She didn't struggle. Inside her handbag, tucked into a sewn slit behind the lining, they found a sealed plastic pouch smaller than a cigarette box. Its contents? A strip of microfilm, barely a few centimeters long. Analysis over the next 24 hours revealed its explosive value. High-resolution satellite images of Soviet naval yards in the Baltic Sea, accompanied by typed annotations estimating ship output, repair cycles, and heat signatures of experimental propulsion systems. There were also blurred photos of East German rail depots and what appeared to be production figures, possibly internal memos, relating to chemical weapons manufacturing in the Harz Mountains. It was damning, detailed, and devastating. Eberhardt, holding the unrolled microfilm to the light in the lab's red gloom, knew they had just intercepted a vein in the wrist of an American intelligence artery, but he also knew something worse. This drop had been meant to be intercepted. The information, while genuine, was likely outdated, even planted, which meant the Americans were testing their watchers, or worse, feeding them a lie to see what they'd do next. The glove had been bait. But whose trap was it, really? It happened with the suddenness of thunder in a quiet room, clean, choreographed, and brutal in its subtlety. 2 days after the intercepted drop, at precisely 16:08, Harwood stepped out of the U.S. Embassy's side entrance onto Wilhelmstrasse, coat buttoned, eyes hidden behind modest glasses, a man on another inconspicuous walk in a city addicted to inconspicuousness. What followed was no gunpoint arrest, no chase scene. A bicycle accident was staged 15 meters ahead, a shrill crash of metal, a woman screaming, blood from a hidden pouch splattered across the curb. Harwood, by instinct or design, hesitated. A child cried, 2 men argued loudly, and in that human chaos, 2 plainclothes officers flanked him like shadows and steered him swiftly to a gray sedan with covered plates. He did not resist. He didn't speak. The door closed behind him like the final note in a funeral dirge. They brought him, not to a police precinct, but to a facility in Treptow, unmarked on official maps, known internally as Die Schleife, the loop. It wasn't a prison, it was a pressure chamber. Harwood was ushered into a room with no sharp edges, no windows, and no clock. A chair, a table, a mirrored wall. He waited 7 hours before anyone entered. Then, without introduction, Major Lutz Eberhardt himself stepped inside, set a small brown evidence box on the table, and opened it to reveal the glove. The glove, laid carefully atop a white linen cloth. "Tell me," Eberhardt said in fluent English, calm as a professor beginning a lecture, "how often do you play chess with your own bait?" Harwood remained silent, unmoved, but his eyes flicked once, involuntarily, to the glove. Eberhardt smiled. He removed a second item, a photograph of the woman who had taken the glove, handcuffed, her lip bloodied, and slid it across the table. Then a third, a still frame from surveillance footage, showing Harwood mid-swap. "You've been compromised," Eberhardt said, sitting opposite him. "We know who you are. The question now is, who are you willing to be?" And so began the psychological campaign. No beatings, no threats of execution. That would have been too crude. Instead, they offered comfort and menace in the same breath. Harwood's embassy contacts were concerned, but distant. His courier was already cooperating. A cellmate, planted, of course, spoke of the CIA abandoning compromised agents. They fed him misinformation, edited audio of fake conversations between U.S. diplomats discussing his expendability, and let him hear them through hidden speakers late at night. They gave him real coffee, then took it away, offered warmth, then freezing cold. Eberhardt returned daily, always polite, always composed, and always bringing more evidence, more implication, more subtle suggestions that Harwood's career was over in America, but could begin anew, here, with them. "You're already here," Eberhardt whispered on the fourth day. "The only thing left is to decide whether to be useful or forgotten." And for the first time, Harwood looked away. That was the crack, the first one. And Eberhardt, master of pressure, knew that from here it would widen. On the 12th day of confinement, with sleep fractured into weaponized fragments and the rhythm of interrogation having frayed the edge of his carefully curated silence, James Harwood spoke. Not in desperation, not in surrender, but in calculation. The mask hadn't cracked, it had shifted, revealing a new face beneath. One not of defiance, by Moses' size, but of negotiation. "I'll give you something," he said, voice hoarse, as if reluctantly peeling away a layer of himself. "Not everything, but enough." What followed was a list. 8 names, all East German, all allegedly tied to Western diplomatic personnel, most of them small fish, a maintenance technician at a chemical plant in Bitterfeld, a radio operator in Erfurt, a part-time translator with a cousin across the wall. None of them tied directly to Harwood's known movements, and none from within the upper echelons of the intelligence infrastructure. It was a breadcrumb trail, not a confession. Eberhardt knew it the moment he saw it, but he also knew the game had changed. Harwood wasn't cracking. He was pivoting, adjusting the terms, trying to leverage perceived weakness into escape. In return, Harwood requested a discreet repatriation, a transfer back to U.S. custody under the guise of a diplomatic misunderstanding. A few bruises, a sealed report, and the whole affair buried beneath Cold War protocol. But the Stasi weren't fools, and Eberhardt, least of all. He approved the release, but it wasn't a concession, it was a trap. On March 4th, Harwood was quietly returned to his apartment in Midi, under the watchful eye of 6 agents embedded across his street, his building, and even within his embassy. They bugged his phone, tapped his faucet, wired the light sockets, even rigged the window frames with fiber optics. The plan was simple: let him feel free, then follow him to whatever was left of his network. But Harwood didn't contact the embassy. He didn't write. He didn't run. Instead, he sat in his apartment for 20 hours, pacing, scribbling in notebooks, staring at his radio. Then, on the evening of March 5th, he left. The Stasi tailed him through side streets slick with freezing rain, past shuttered cafes and flickering street lamps, watching as he turned not toward the embassy, but toward a bookstore 2 blocks from Alexanderplatz. The store had been shuttered for months, under renovation, yet Harwood entered through a side door with a key. Inside, beneath the floorboards, they later found a transmitter, compact, directional, Western. But they didn't find Harwood. When agents moved in, he was gone. What they did recover was a scrap of paper left beside the transmitter. 8 new names, none of them on Harwood's earlier list, all high-ranking, all real. It became clear then, Harwood had never broken. He had played them, offering bait to earn trust, only to bury the knife deeper. Worse still, the transmitter had been activated. A message had been sent. What it contained, no one knew. But its timing, moments before the agents breached the building, suggested something catastrophic had just been set in motion. Eberhardt, holding the warm shell of the device, realized too late that the glove had not been the trap. He had been. The night after the transmitter activated, the first arrest was made. A technician in Gina dragged from his apartment in silence. No warrant, no explanation, just the thud of boots in the hallway and the dead stare of operatives who didn't blink. By dawn, there were 6 more. Within 72 hours, the Stasi's crackdown spread like fire across the country. Cottbus, Leipzig, Rostock, Dresden. Names from Harwood's original breadcrumb list, others from the second message, and a handful who had never appeared in either, rounded up preemptively, insurance against shadows. It was brutal efficiency, the kind that only a terrified state can muster. In total, 17 East German citizens were detained under suspicion of espionage, each accused of collaborating with Western intelligence agencies, all now locked in isolation cells under bright lights and round-the-clock observation. Interrogations began without sleep or lawyers. 3 of the detainees vanished entirely. No record of transfer, no trial, no graves. Even within the Stasi, their disappearance raised whispers. Among them, it was suspected, had been a high-level informant buried deep inside the Ministry of Science, a man who had fed NATO early missile development figures in exchange for safe passage that never came. The woman who had picked up the second glove, the courier in the gray coat, was never seen again. Her name, assumed to be Anke Doring, was scrubbed from the Registry of State Employment, her apartment reassigned within a week, her personal effects boxed and burned. Neighbors were interviewed once, then told never to speak of her again. In Berlin, the embassy received a formal protest from the East German Foreign Ministry regarding unlawful provocations and violations of sovereignty by agents acting under diplomatic cover. The Americans issued a terse denial. Harwood was recalled quietly through a negotiated back channel, departing via Checkpoint Charlie with nothing but a suitcase and a half-hearted wave to the guards who hated him. Back in Langley, the CIA neither confirmed nor denied his identity. But internally, Harwood's operation was marked redacted successful, cover burned. Yet success came at cost. The dead drops had gone dark. The technical supply lines were broken. Surveillance teams in the East had to start over from zero. The network Harwood helped build, 4 years of cultivating whisper networks, subtle drops, anonymous signals, had been destroyed overnight. No one knew exactly what he had transmitted in that final burst, only that it included the names of trusted assets alongside decoys, perhaps even personal enemies within the East's system, using betrayal to pave a return home. The Stasi began purges within their own ranks, interrogating their own officers to root out suspected leakers, feeding their own paranoia until even silence became dangerous. Files were double-checked. Entire sections were reassigned. Eberhardt himself was pulled from active fieldwork and reassigned to a desk, officially for his exhaustion, unofficially for letting the ghost walk out. The glove, now stored in a sealed archive vault, remained as the quiet artifact of the day everything fell apart. Not the beginning of a case, but the end of a network. And the message it left behind was clear. It takes only one object to collapse an entire illusion of control. The bench is still there, a chipped stretch of iron slats nestled beneath skeletal trees in Volkspark, Friedrichshain, where pigeons gather now and then and lovers sometimes sit, unaware that they're occupying the stage of a long, closed act. The city around it has changed. East Berlin became just Berlin, and the wall that once cleaved lives apart is now a memory tourists follow with camera phones and half-understood reverence. But the bench, modest and unremarkable, holds the echo of a moment when the Cold War inhaled sharply through a misplaced glove. The glove itself no longer rests there. It lies preserved in a glass archive drawer deep within the BSTU, the Federal Commissioner for the Stasi Records, catalogued under item 4403A, alongside its evidence tag and the faded memo from Major Lutz Eberhardt, dated February 1983. For decades, it slept in silence, buried under layers of secrecy until the reunification of Germany cracked open the past and let old ghosts crawl into the light. Researchers stumbled on the file in '98, Operation Nest Glands, noting how one glove, left precisely 6 minutes after patrol had passed, spiraled into arrests, surveillance, and the collapse of an entire intelligence network. No one ever found out whether Harwood's final message was real or a diversion. The CIA never acknowledged him. The East German agents he named, some real, some invented, faced fates that never matched their crimes, if crimes they were. And Eberhardt? His post-Stasi life was a whisper. He died in '97 in a small flat in Prenzlauer Berg, leaving behind shelves of carefully arranged notebooks, each entry a universe of suspicion. But the story endures, not in textbooks, not in grand political retrospectives, but in this strange, chilling chain reaction sparked by a single object that should have meant nothing. A glove, American leather, burgundy silk interior, not carelessly dropped, not forgotten, but placed, as precisely as a detonator. It wasn't the object that mattered, it was the pattern it disrupted. That's the legacy of Cold War Berlin, a place where you could be betrayed by routine, undone by your habits, exposed by silence. Spies vanished not with gunfire, but with bureaucratic signatures and sudden absences. Trust was as fictional as the names they lived under. And sometimes, it wasn't a double agent, a defection, or a coded message that undid the operation. Sometimes, it was something simpler, something smaller, like a glove left on a bench, just long enough to make someone look. That glove now rests beneath glass, inert, anonymous to the casual observer. But those who know, those who read the file, who study the photographs, who follow the narrative's tight coil, understand what it represents. A symbol of how fragile control truly was. A monument to the idea that no system, however totalitarian, is immune to the consequences of noticing something that doesn't belong. In the end, the spy wasn't caught, red-handed. He was caught gloved, and in Cold War Berlin that was enough to start a fire. If one glove could unravel a spy network, imagine what other secrets still lie buried in plain sight. Like, subscribe and follow for more Cold War stories where the smallest details change the course of history.